I went through some serious mental health issues, and that caused me to get over a month behind in schoolwork. Now, I finished this semester with a 3.9, so a bitch did that. But the thing is, I had to make some really specific choices. Welcome back to What I Wish I Knew, a series where I help people replicate my triumphs, but more often learn from my mistakes. And today's episode is about reading in grad school, which I know is specific, but I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. This is not a Studytube channel. While I so far, am doing well in grad school, there's not a single thing that I do that I would recommend to another living human soul. So we're going to talk about just what I wish I would have known about reading in particular, because I am in a humanities degree. I'm getting my master's in religious studies. So reading is a huge part of my program. I would venture to say that there's a lot of reading in almost every grad school program, but I've never been in the STEM field or anything like that. So perhaps it's not as intense. And the first thing I wish I would have known was that, yes, it is possible to do all of the reading, but that does not always mean that you should. Let me explain. When you first get that syllabus and see how many full books you are reading, how many journal articles you are reading, how many lectures you are watching, and therefore lecture notes you are reading, it can feel overwhelming. And I was genuinely surprised at how much time I had in a day to actually work through all these readings in a process and pattern that made sense to me once I was no longer working full time. But that is the caveat. I am no longer working full time. I am a full-time student who works part-time as a teaching assistant and also takes on freelance work. So I don't have every day, all day to myself, but I do have the 40 hours, and let's be clear, it was more like 50 hours a week that I was dedicating to my full-time work that I now can dedicate to my schoolwork. Now, to be clear, at least for me at my reading speed, this could be upwards of 5 to 6 hours of reading a day, sometimes even more, but it is doable. And I think sometimes, at least when you've been out of college for as long as I have, I spent about 4 years working before I went to grad school after undergrad. The idea of how much is expected of you to read and therefore retain can seem a bit astronomical. But it is possible, and I have done it. The reason I say it is not always the best thing to do is because you have to look at your priorities. And when I say priorities, I mean, for me specifically, in my last semester of this first year, I went through some serious mental health issues, and that caused me to get over a month behind in schoolwork. Now, I finished this semester with a 3.9, so a bitch did that. But the thing is, I had to make some really specific choices. Even though for my religion classes specifically, I genuinely enjoyed the majority of the readings that I did, I reached a point where I knew that if I did every single reading from now to the end of the semester and went back and finished all the readings that I missed, I physically would not have time for the schoolwork that I needed to do on top of my internship and on top of the responsibilities I had as a teaching assistant. So I made the choice to not finish all of my readings for the semester in order to finish all of the work. Now, I'm in this program because I want to be. This is not something I'm doing to check a box. This is something that I genuinely enjoy and I'm using to enrich myself, but also enrich my career. So I'm honestly a little disappointed that I was not able to finish all of those readings, and that although I have access to some of them after the classes are over, I don't have access to all of them. But I want to tell the story to say that if you feel incredibly overwhelmed, it is possible to complete all of them. But also, I do think you have to pick your battles. And the second thing I wish I had known is that I think everyone should be strategic when starting your readings. So what I used to do is I would just go down the list of the readings in the order that the professor put them up on iCollege or put them in the syllabus. And I quickly learned that that made 0.00 sense. One, many professors that I've had will hint or outright tell you which readings they want you to start with, because that's the conversation they're going to be starting with in class next week. So if you have couple hundred pages to read across 3 different books, start with the book that you know the class discussion is going to be on. I know that sounds so obvious. It probably is to you, but sometimes I get so in my type A to-do list mindset that I'm just chugging on down the list. The second way that I would recommend prioritizing your readings is also looking at what readings do you need to be in front of a computer to do, what readings do you need your textbook to do, what readings do you want to print out to do. Now, I have a mix of books in person, of books online, and then articles that I'm downloading. So if I know that I am going to have time in the car or time at a doctor's appointment, why would I not download an article to read on my phone, and then read the big heavy textbook on the couch when I get home. I wasn't always being very practical or strategic about the order that I did these assignments in, when if I had done that, I could have found better use of my time. The third way I'd recommend prioritizing your readings, which may sound strange, but it worked for me, is start with the ones that are most interesting to you. I know they tell you to start with the hardest thing first, then you get it out of the way, and then you can do the fun stuff. But when I would start with the hardest readings, the most like highbrow, academic, dense language, the ones that are talking about epistemology and cosmology and all these things I had never heard of before, it just made me move even slower, be even more reluctant to finish. And by the time I actually did finish, I was like, I need a break, and that break turned into be the rest of the evening. But when I started with the readings I was actually interested in, the authors, the theologians, the scholars that I wanted to read more from, or the articles had really interesting titles like The Queering of Black History, it got me engaged, it got me excited, and it helped me work through the other readings faster because I had built up some momentum. The next thing I would want to recommend, or wish I had known about readings, is that just because I have watched a bunch of YouTube videos of people showing me their style of annotating their readings and taking notes while they read, that doesn't mean that I, A, know how to do that, and B, that it's gonna work for me. When I first started my grad program a year ago, I was spending so much time on these readings, like doing full outlines, bullet point, indent, space bar, break. I had like, what those little girls we made fun of in middle school for having like 20 different colored markers and like perfect teacher handwriting and bubble letters for horrible things. For what? Like, to what end? I never looked at those notes again. Ever. Because at least in my program right now, we very rarely had essays. We very rarely had tests. Everything was essays. And for some people, it may be easier to go back and look at their notes than reading the article itself. But I found it easier to skim or review sections of an article as opposed to going back and looking at my notes and trying to remember what my shorthand meant. Also, I normally wasn't using those notes in class either. When I do a reading, I am able to retain enough information to, if I understand it, that's another thing, if I understand it, to do a basic outline. So I found that it was actually a waste of my time to do these really, really detailed written or typed outlines when I wasn't referencing them anymore, when I got the main themes of the author's argument and what they used to support it without that. And even when I did have to go back and reference, I was always just reaching for the book itself as opposed to my own notes. Now that's a really specific thing. Some people love their annotating system. Some people need to write something down or hear it out loud in order for them to retain it. And I'm not saying I have a photographic memory by any sense, but I wish I had not assumed that just because 14,000 Studytubers take notes a certain way, that was going to be the way that I took notes, and that was going to be the way that retention of information worked best for me. And moving into another point about retention of information, when you do the readings though, you have to make sure you understand them. And I don't mean that you understand everything, or else why the hell would you be here? But there's a difference between reading something to say you've read it and being like, yeah, this article was about this and they had these 3 things, and like really sitting and processing it. Like, there is no shame in stopping after a chapter and just going, okay, what? And I cannot tell you how many times I was sitting on that couch back there talking to myself, trying to talk myself through the concepts I just read. Because not only is this understanding going to build your base of knowledge moving forward and allow you to be a more engaged and dedicated and introspective classmate and colleague in these conversations with your professors and other students, and also for someone like me who's going to be teaching next year, pull from this knowledge when I'm going to be teaching other people, it also makes the essay writing process so much easier. And this was something that it took me to my second semester to realize. When it came time to write papers, when it came time to pick a thesis, when it came time to go to office hours and be like, I don't know what to write about, 9 times out of 10, I ended up pulling a quote or a whole article or a theologian or someone that I had learned about in either that class or a previous class, held that in my mind and extrapolated an idea from that, or combined ideas from 2 different places. And I found that I was only able to do that with the articles and the journal chapters and the textbooks that I really was deeply engaging with in reading. For example, I wrote a paper about the long-suffering Black woman trope in Tyler Perry movies and juxtaposed that with an article I read about the story of Hagar and womanism. I was able to do that only because I was really investing digesting and retaining the information in the articles I read about Katie Cannon, in the articles I read by Robert J. Patterson, and then pulling from my personal experience watching Tyler Perry movies. If I had just read those articles just to be like, okay, here's the main points for class and move on, I would have been SOL. I would have had no idea what to write about for half of the papers that I was doing. And so I want to encourage you that when you are reading things, is it really about, okay, I need to know every single little detail and date and name, because if that's how your brain works, I'm proud of you, but not mine. Or is it, do I get it? Or do I really get what is happening here and why? And if it interests you, it's okay to spend more time on it. I absolutely spent more time on the essays and prompts and all these things that interested me more than the ones, especially for classes that I was required to take, that I just couldn't care less about. And I feel like that's not something I gave myself permission to do in my first semester. I was like, I have to exert equal amounts of energy and effort across all things perfectly. Nobody does that in their job, in the way they manage their relationships, certainly not in school. And the really cool thing about academia and research is if I can go to my professor and say, this is an idea I have, and this is the gap that it fills in the research, or this is how it combines two different existing ideas but in a new way, or this is this idea but I want to look at it from this perspective. And they're like, oh yeah, cool, go. Go. It's my time, it's my money, it's my freedom. I can go and research and write and explore, but I would have nowhere to start from, nowhere to build from if I wasn't actively reading texts, not to just to regurgitate them in class, but for my own edification. So that is another thing that I wish I would have known before I started grad school. Another thing I wish I would have known is that I was going to have to experiment to figure out how reading worked for me. And that might sound really weird as someone who has a booktube channel who's been reading for a very long time, but reading books and reading nonfiction books is so different, at least for me, than reading academic nonfiction. Like, there are nonfiction books I've talked about on this channel that are dense and heavy and very, citation rich, and they're great texts, but they were written with a common public in mind. They were written for a non-academic public. And in my perspective, I find that writing to be more accessible without in any way, minimizing the effects of the research, without in any way, downplaying the importance of something, without in any way watering down the concepts. Unfortunately, there are academic writers, and then there's an academic culture that enforces and, uplifts this idea that you have to say a concept as complicated, as big, as fancy, as thesaurus-full as possible in order for it to be journal entry worthy. So it's hard. Even if I get what's happening, I am reading so much slower than I normally read anything else. And so I had to relearn a schedule of reading. I have learned I'm not someone who can do 30 minutes on, then 10 minutes off. I can't do the Pomodoro method of 45 minutes on, 15 minutes off, because it might take me 45 minutes just to wrap my brain around the basic thesis of this article. And then to stop right there in the middle on page 9 of a 17-page journal article, it's just going to mess me up entirely. I learned that I read best in long chunks. Now, of course, I do take breaks. I'll be on Instagram, I'll be on BookTube, watching YouTube videos, but I have to take breaks in between readings. I have to either finish this chapter or finish this article or finish these lecture notes. I can't do it in little bitty chunks, but that's just something you're gonna have to learn for yourself. And I was definitely really frustrated with myself at the beginning of my program because I felt like I should just get it. I read, I'm a reader. I talk about books. I should be able to just sit down and plow through all this at once, or be able to, pop on and pop off with the way I see other people doing studying. But again, you are going to have to find your own cadence in order to get the readings done, or the readings you want to get done in, I would argue, any grad program. And the very last thing that I wish I would have known before figuring out readings in grad school is that everything that I read and have read, I am capable of writing. Now, nobody in any field knows everything, and there are levels to expertise. I am not claiming that I'm going to step up on the game in my first year in grad school and just completely change the face of womanist theology. But as I saw my writing improve, as I saw the grades I was getting, as I saw the way my mind was expanding by what I was engaging with, and when I started reading things that weren't just by established authors and famous professors, but other people's thesis statements, other people's doctoral theses, and saw how they informed my research, I realized that I too have the ability, logically I knew this, but like emotionally I didn't, to contribute to this canon of academic work. And I hope to contribute to a canon of just general public knowledge that does not require a JSTOR membership for access. There are so many things that I read that I thought with time and energy and work, I could do this. And in some cases, I could do this better. And better for me means more accessibly. When you're reading all this work in grad school, you're being exposed to this huge, huge field, and I don't care what field you're in, it's huge, either broad or it's huge deep or it's both, and religion is absolutely no exception. And even me, who has like a bachelor's in this degree, or excuse me, in this field, who isn't completely new to it, I still had this idea in my mind that there were a very narrow few people, a select few people on the top of that ivory tower who had work that was worthy of being taught in schools, or work that was worthy of engaging. But reading more broadly, more diversely, more critically, with more enthusiasm, has opened my eyes to all this information, all these perspectives, all these different ways to contribute to this field. So this point, I guess, is technically more about writing than reading. But if I had not done the reading in school, if I had not invested in the reading, I wouldn't have come to this realization myself that I am possible. Actually, no, that's it. That I am possible, that what I want is possible, but really that I have the potential to create things that other people will read one day and have their own minds opened, maybe even just a crack, by the things that I put out into the world. So on that note, those were a list of things that I wish I knew about reading in grad school before I started. I have a whole other year left. I am taking a class this summer. So while this is not a Studytube channel, and I really don't want to go down that path, if you do have any questions about my grad program or grad school in general, or reading in academia, definitely let me know and I'll make more videos like this. And as always, I hope you have a great day. Bye.